On January 12, 2026, the United States Secretary of State publicly declared, "We are willing to buy Greenland from Denmark." When the response was negative, the White House stated that it would take the island anyway. This is not theory. It is not a prediction. It is documented reality, and it has already begun. While much of the world still believes Greenland is just a lost block of ice in the north, major powers are treating the territory as a strategic financial asset, rich in oil, rare earth minerals, and military value. While everyone is focused on traditional wars, the real battle is being fought over territory, energy, and supply chains. Most people are distracted, underestimating this silent movement. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the United States has placed Greenland at the center of the new global dispute, and why this directly affects your financial life, even if you don't realize it yet. Anticipating this turning point is the difference between opportunity and collapse. Behind every war, invasion, or diplomatic agreement lies a logic far colder than most people imagine. It's not about ideology, patriotism, or defending values. It's about assets, about capital. What appears to be a political movement is almost always a financial one. The detail that almost no one notices is that, throughout history, the most contested territories have also been the most profitable. Greenland, for example, is not seen by strategists as a country. It is treated as an undervalued asset, a piece of land that, despite the ice, holds oil, gas, rare earth elements, and future trade routes. When the United States bought Alaska in 1867, they were ridiculed. Today, that piece of land produces oil, houses strategic military bases, and connects two global powers. It wasn't a mistake. It was anticipation. The Panama Canal, bought, managed, and fiercely protected by the Americans for over a century. The Suez Canal caused wars. Hong Kong was the most valuable financial asset in Asia until its transition to China. None of these decisions were emotional. They were all transactions. And here's the tipping point. In the new global financial order, what's at stake isn't territory. It's what territory can generate. Greenland is positioned at the epicenter of three strategic fronts: energy, routes, and military deterrence. This may seem small, but it's not. We're talking about a kind of frozen new Middle East, where the value lies not in what has already been explored, but in what is still buried under the ice, or will be revealed by the thaw. This is where everything begins to change. Now, while the world is still debating whether Trump is serious or bluffing, the data shows that Greenland has already entered the radar of investors, militaries, and energy powers. The silent movement has begun, and it is not isolated. It is part of something much larger, a new cycle where natural resources are once again becoming the center of gravity of global power. Every empire that has reached the top of the global food chain has had one thing in common at its origin: control of natural resources. It wasn't luck. It wasn't just diplomacy. It was energy, raw materials, and productive power. The detail that few realize is that there's no strong currency without a real base. All financial dominance begins with energy dominance. The British Empire didn't dominate the world solely through its ships. It dominated coal. And with coal, it controlled the railroads, the ports, industry, and expansion. The United States became the superpower it is by dominating oil in the 20th century and transforming it into dollars. The USSR had energy, but without a strong currency, it couldn't sustain its model. China, meanwhile, quietly built its empire on rare earth elements and heavy manufacturing. This sounds technical, but it's strategic. Whoever controls resources controls inflation, growth, and currency. The price of food, the cost of transportation, access to technology, everything starts with energy and raw materials. This is where empires are born or fall. Gold, for example, is not just a store of value. It's a shield against currency devaluation. Natural gas is not just an energy input. It's an instrument of geopolitical blackmail. This is where Greenland comes in again. Hidden beneath layers of ice are some of the largest untapped reserves of oil, gas, and strategic minerals on the planet. Most people haven't realized it yet, but Greenland is currently the only territory in the world with high energy potential and low military presence, a combination that empires of the past would never have allowed to pass up. And that's the point. The United States, China, and Russia know that future power will belong to whoever has direct access to real assets. Paper, debt, and currencies may collapse, but oil, gold, and rare earth elements remain bargaining chips in any scenario. That's why the silent battle has already begun. And in the next segment, you'll see how the melting Arctic ice is accelerating this race. The map of global power is melting, literally. The Arctic is opening up, and along with it, a new sea route that could shorten travel time between Asia and Europe by up to 40%. This sounds like geography, but it's pure finance. In a world where time is money and trade defines empires, this change alters everything. Historically, every major shift in trade routes has redefined the axis of economic power. When the Portuguese rounded Africa, Venice collapsed. When the Suez Canal opened, Eastern trade was reshaped. When the Americans opened the Panama Canal, they shortened the distance between oceans and between profits. Every new route has always destroyed one power and raised another. Now, the Arctic route is about to do the same. With the melting ice caps, What was once a frozen desert is becoming a corridor for billions of dollars in goods, and whoever controls this passage will control logistical costs, capital flows, and the pace of globalization. This is where everything starts to accelerate. Russia is already positioned, military forces, bases, icebreakers. China is investing heavily in the so-called Polar Silk Road. And the United States, realizing its delay, is doubling down on its intentions regarding Greenland, which happens to be right next to this new artery of global trade. The detail that almost no one sees is that what's at stake isn't just who gets through, but who collects the toll. And this revolution in trade routes doesn't happen in isolation. It anticipates a complete reorganization of the economic order, because if goods change their route, profits change hands. And when profits change hands, power changes address. In the next section, you will understand why this change in routes marks the beginning of the end of the rules of the order created in 1945. For nearly 80 years, the world followed a set of rules written after World War II. Bretton Woods, the UN, NATO, the IMF, institutions created to prevent new conflicts and ensure predictability. But here's the point. Almost no one wants to admit. Those rules no longer exist. They remain on paper, but they no longer have any force. The dollar no longer has the same backing. NATO no longer inspires the same fear. Red lines are being crossed every day, without retaliation, without response. And when the rules cease to apply, capital runs. Because money, real capital, doesn't seek institutional stability. It seeks protection. And protection today is no longer found in treaties. It's found in real assets. In the 1970s, the end of the gold standard marked the beginning of global monetary fragility. Oil shocks destroyed economies that seemed invincible. And if you look closely, you'll see that every crisis of hegemony is preceded by a collapse in confidence. That was the case with the British Empire. That was the case with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And the signs are now repeating themselves. Greenland enters this scenario as a symbol of the new paradigm. No one is waiting for permission to act anymore. The United States isn't asking. China is taking the initiative. Russia is positioning itself. Force has once again taken control. And what was once diplomacy is now strategic occupation. This is the detail that many still ignore. When the dollar weakens and institutions lose authority, what defines power is what can be physically controlled. Energy, routes, territory. Therefore, in the next segment, you will understand how this new logic is fueling a silent dispute between the United States, China, and Russia over assets that will define the next dominant currency. What is happening in the Arctic is not just a territorial race, it's an invisible war for supply chains. The United States, China, and Russia are vying not only for control, but also for production. And the detail that few realize is that future dominance lies not in weapons, but in resources. China, for example, isn't sending troops, it's sending capital. It has invested in ports, research, and infrastructure in the polar region, connecting the Silk Road to the icy waters of the north. Russia has already militarized virtually its entire Arctic border and controls most of the world's icebreakers. Meanwhile, the United States is trying to catch up by doubling its presence in Greenland. This looks like a trade dispute, but it's a reorganization of global power. History repeats itself in different guises. In the 19th century, it was the colonial race. In the 20th century, the struggle for oil in the Middle East. Today, it's the turn of rare earths, lithium, water, new routes, and microelectronics. Whoever dominates these assets will define production standards, global costs, and inevitably the currency the world will use. Because money isn't just paper. Money is trust. And trust comes from the ability to produce what the world needs. That's why the dominant currency of the future will be issued by whoever controls the supply chains of the future. And this war has already begun. Not with bullets, but with contracts, investments, and logistical control. This is where Greenland's role becomes even clearer. It is a logistical hub in formation, a repository of buried resources, and a key piece in Arctic routes. And the three giants know this. What the public sees as a forgotten island, strategists see as one of the most valuable chessboards on the global chessboard. And this chessboard has a hidden force that few are connecting with the current scenario, energy. And in the next segment, you will understand how silent energy crises have always preceded the greatest systemic collapses in modern history. Every major financial collapse you've studied or experienced has one element in common that almost no one immediately connects: energy. The overlooked detail is that inflation, more often than not, doesn't start with banks. It starts with the price of oil. And when energy goes up, everything goes up. Transportation, food, production. The foundation of the economy trembles. In the 1970s, 2 oil shocks transformed the world in less than a decade. Global inflation soared, weak currencies collapsed, and debts exploded. And it all began with blockades, crises in the Middle East, and manipulation of energy flows. It seems distant, but it's happening again, and more quietly than ever. Today, the energy battle isn't just about oil. It's about gas, uranium, lithium, and rare earth elements. All of these, directly or indirectly, define the cost of living, the cost of production, and political stability. Countries that dominate these sources invisibly control global inflation. Countries that depend on them become hostages. This is where Greenland's role intensifies. Hidden beneath the ice, it holds valuable energy reserves and direct access to new logistical routes that could drastically reduce global transportation costs. Controlling this territory means controlling a critical part of the future energy equation. And in a world where inflation has become a systemic risk, that's synonymous with power, and this power is what defines who survives a collapse. Because expensive energy kills economies, cheap, controlled, and stable energy sustains hegemonies. In the next segment, we'll connect all the dots and show why Greenland is not just a disputed territory, but a symbol of the new global financial order. Greenland is not just a remote territory covered in ice. It is a mirror of what the world is becoming, a world where blocks replace nations, real assets replace paper money, and force replaces treaties. This is where everything is revealed. Greenland is not the beginning. It is a reflection of a global transition that has already begun. We are leaving the era of coordinated globalization and entering a new cycle, strategic deglobalization. What was once about cooperation is now about control. What was regulated by institutions is now defined by occupation, militarization, and direct access to resources. And most curiously, the most valuable assets on the planet have returned to being the oldest: land, energy, and metals. The dollar, the euro, the yen, all are being questioned. And when currencies lose credibility, global capital migrates, not to new promises, but to old certainties: oil, gas, gold, rare earths. Money isn't fleeing, it's burying itself in real assets. Greenland symbolizes this movement. It's the point where geopolitical dispute meets financial logic. And the question almost no one is asking is, why now? Why the sudden interest in a frozen territory? The answer is simple and brutal: because the time for trust is over. The world no longer believes that the financial system will stand on words alone. Now the winners will be defined by who has substance, not narrative. And what comes next is even bigger. Because if Greenland is being treated as an asset, how many other territories, reserves, and resources will come under scrutiny? The movement has already begun. And in closing, you will understand why recognizing this pattern is the first step in positioning yourself before the next major collapse. History is clear. Whenever the world loses faith in paper, it reverts to what is real, and what we are seeing today is no different. Greenland is merely the visible tip of a historic turning point, the beginning of a new financial order where currency, power, and territory once again intersect. Most people still think we're facing isolated events, but those who study historical cycles understand the collapse never begins with panic. It begins with a silent repricing of strategic assets. First, insiders move, then markets correct, and finally, the masses wake up, only too late. So the nagging question remains: are you watching this as a spectator, or are you positioning yourself as a protagonist? Because understanding is only the first step. What separates those who build wealth from those who lose everything is acting based on reality, not illusion. If this video resonated with you, click the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share it with anyone who isn't yet seeing what's happening. And before you leave, watch the next video on the channel. It connects everything we've talked about here to an even bigger movement that has already begun. The next piece is already moving.